Hello and welcome to everyone out there in the Actual Tech Media audience. Thanks so much for joining us on this webinar. We've got a great presentation lined up for you today. The topic is a practical guide to scaling AppSec with ASPM. The event is brought to you in partnership thanks to our friends at Synopsys. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the format of the event today. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions. Security in the enterprise is, a hot topic today. Companies are being attacked left and right, unfortunately, and so we need to do whatever we can do to better protect ourselves. And so this is a great opportunity to learn about really innovative solutions and get all your questions answered. So we encourage your questions there in the questions pane of the audience console. Many of you have already said hello and good afternoon, and we love to see that, but we also want your technical questions. We'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the event, and we even have a best question prize. I'll talk about that more here in just a moment. But first, I want to encourage you to check out the handouts tab as well. There's a link there to get started with Synopsys. And that will actually take you to a resource here with 5 different resources inside. One is the full slide deck from today. There's a blog resource. There's an insight into how security posture management works. And there's a Gartner report as well. And then a data sheet on Synopsys Software Risk Manager. So make sure you just click on that link. That'll open up a new web browser tab or window, and you can check out all those resources, during or after the event. And then at the end of the webinar, it'll be my pleasure to announce the winner of our Amazon $250 gift card prize. If you're watching this after the live event recorded, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found right there in the handouts tab of your audience console. And then, as I mentioned, today we also have a best question prize. And so if you have a question, during the presentation, enter it there into the questions box, and we'll be reviewing all those questions after the event and selecting what we feel is the best question of the day. So keep those questions coming, and you'll be entered into the prize drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Of course, you must still meet the prize terms and conditions. All right, with that housekeeping information out of the way, it's now my pleasure to bring in and introduce today's expert presenters. Welcome to Natasha Gupta, who is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Synopsys, and Jimmy Raybon, who is a Senior Product Manager at Synopsys. Jimmy and Natasha, it's great to have you both on. I'll hand it off to you. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction. Folks, we are so excited today to have all of you here to join us on this webinar about Application Security Posture Management, or ASPM. Many of you may have heard of this emerging trend in the application security space, and we're excited to talk to you today about how there are various strategies in applying a successful ASPM approach in really managing software risk at large. And hopefully today out of this webinar, you're going to take away some key tactics and some characteristics of a good ASPM solution as you explore how to, within your organization, start to implement some really scalable practices to make the most out of what you're doing with AppSec today. And I'll be joined by my colleague here, Jimmy Raybon, who is going to give us a lot of insight here on what we're seeing in the application security space, and really as technical use cases and best practices in charting your ASPM journey. What are those practices and use cases? And with that, I'd like to give a brief introduction as to what do we see at large with the market landscape, and what are we noticing at large when we look at the fundamental problems that we see with traditional AppSec. One of the major parts of this is that a lot of organizations have really invested in application security tooling. And indeed, at large, most organizations are probably using maybe 6 tools or more on average. And in a study commissioned by Synopsys, One of the components of implementing this tooling is the expectation that there's an ability to really control that level of quality of software and security of software. And yet we find at large that so much of production level code still has a proliferated amount of vulnerabilities and flaws that make it to the production level. And one of the aspects of this is that despite a lot of that security investment, software risk is still a huge problem for organizations to grapple with. And oftentimes it's like finding a needle in a haystack of being able to grapple with what is my true security posture across my software. And indeed, what we find at large across the industry is that in spite of a lot of security investment, and we see this not just with application security, but across the board, there is a tremendous level of proliferation of different tools just to get a single sense of your security posture. There's a recent study by IBM that estimates that a large enterprise on average, when you look at the gamut of every security need they would have, from network security to SOAR to application security, endpoint security, they're investing in as many as 50 different tools to just get a sense of what their total security posture is. And that's a lot to manage. That's a lot of investment that's gone into ascertaining their organizational risk. And yet, in spite of that, there is often poor return on investment of that security tooling. And if we look at application security in particular, with that return on investment of tooling, there's an expectation that organizations will be able to ascertain from one place what is my total software risk? What are the most required actions I need to take for impactful security work? Monitoring staff across. And yet, what we often find as a pain point for a lot of enterprises today is that when we look at the total cost of upholding not just tooling, but the staff, training, resources, support contracts, there's often a poor return on, in spite of investing in all that tooling, you still can't get a complete view of your software risk. You still don't have a way to consistently instill quality checks, because a lot of the time, these tools have their own disparate ways of ascertaining that software risk. They have maybe one granular view in how there are different languages that are understood by that vendor. There's a different level of compatibility or integration they have within that environment. And at the same time, when you have everything so spread out and perhaps used differently by different members of your team, you don't have a unified view of what that common risk taxonomy looks like across your organization. So there's inconsistency in application security checks. With that inconsistency, there is also an inability to prioritize meaningful security work. Simply put, if you can't get a sense of what your risk posture is from one place because you have so many disparate tools that are maybe used by different people on your team across security and development, you have inconsistency in even being able to standardize the check, you can't even get a sense of which issues are most impactful to fix first. And we hear this so much from customers all across the board, that there's an inability to enforce certain SLAs on remediation times. There is an inability to be able to ascertain where is my most vulnerable software. The last point here is that oftentimes, in spite of having a lot of testing tools, organizations cannot test at the speed their business demands. It's difficult to integrate these tests within their given developer environments, to do so in a lightweight, intelligent way. And as a result, a lot of times, even though organizations do want to, at large, and we find this across the board when we look at the security landscape, that there is a lot of regulatory scrutiny on a lot of the new regulations that have been passed in being able to maintain that level of security standard and software quality, but there's an inability to keep up with those standards in conjunction with meeting certain customer SLAs, maintaining that business productivity and business continuity, and being able to ensure developer productivity. Jimmy, I know you talked to customers all the time about these 5 pain points, and walk us through a little bit about what you hear on a day-to-day basis from the life of a head of AppSec or an AppSec manager.
Absolutely. So a lot of what you were talking about, Natasha, really rings true when I talk to customers. You have different capabilities at different parts that are integrated into different parts of the software development lifecycle. They are of varying quality. The integrations that they support are of varying quality. In terms of communication and the way that you communicate those risks to a developer who can do something about the risk is often handled very inefficiently and inconsistently. So I hear that very consistently, that we don't have a standard process that we can apply to all of the issues that we want, that we care about, right? That we have to care about from a regulatory perspective, that we have to care about from a customer perspective. And we can't easily apply universal SLAs across that due to the kind of really the tool dispersion that you spoke of, the inconsistent approach that various tools take. There is a lot of inconsistency in the way risk is communicated. There aren't any nice conferences where these groups have come together and decided on the same taxonomies. So often there's quite a bit of normalization that would have to be applied to really be efficient with a lot of these application security initiatives that you've talked about here.
So Jimmy, tell us a little bit about what are some common pain points you've heard from the head of AppSec on what they're trying to grapple with as they go down this path of making their AppSec initiatives really work for them.
I can tell you one for sure that won't work, which is trying to train them on a new interface in which to look at issues. So I would say that the first one, how do I get my developers to adopt my tools? I hear this all the time. This is very consistent. And I really prefer an approach that asks kind of the inverse question, which is, what is the most effective way to communicate work to your developers in your organization? And the answer to that question is really how we should communicate risk consistently. Often that can mean a tightly coupled integration into issue tracking, right? Automation of consistency. But how to get developers to adopt the tools, one is to make it as efficient as possible. Developers are overloaded, right? Every bit of time a developer wastes looking at a false positive or learning a confusing interface, they're not writing code, right, to go win business and increase shareholder value, and they're not able, they're really not able to do their job. And developers don't want to write insecure code. They want to write high quality code efficiently that's interesting to them, and they want to know exactly what is expected of them. And I think being consistent with them, having a consistent process, consistent communication strategy, that's really the key to getting developers to adopt the tools. I'd also say that choosing highly accurate tools is another good way to get developers to adopt your tools, because developers hate false positives. So the ability to remember what we don't care about and track that for the life of the project is also critically important, because developers do not want to see uninteresting findings or things that are, technically false positives. In terms of achieving AppSec return on investment, do you know if your security policy is being applied consistently? I would say that is something I hear. It's very often that I hear that is not the case when I'm talking to a customer. They don't have an easy way to apply policy across all of the different tools, techniques. And then what is my application security risk when the risk is not consolidated? How is an AppSec persona to make the best choice from a risk perspective when we only have pieces of the information? We're seeing a convergence, right? We're seeing a convergence of operational security data, of cloud security data, application or dev specific data. And that's to provide, better assessments of risk, to make better decisions with better data. And then in terms of scale, right? Let's look at the inconsistency. The reason it doesn't scale is because it is inconsistent, right? If we want to scale something, we need to make it as consistent and automatable as possible. And when you are universally applying what you care about, tracking when you want those fixed, communicating that efficiently, it doesn't seem as arduous to scale your AST investments and get that return on investment you're looking for.
Absolutely, Jimmy. And one of the aspects of this that you touch on in so many of these stories that you hear from customers is that having the foundation is one part of that maturity journey in adopting testing tools and being able to make the most of those testing tools. But it's important that these three components of the journey work together. And if we look at what are in various stages, what we see customers adopting as part of that maturity journey, we can look at this graph here as a way of charting what that path looks like. So if we look at getting the most out of what you have in AppSec tooling as one part of this, and then the ultimate goal, which is making your software more resilient, producing secure software, with the adoption of all of these application security initiatives and these vendors that you may be investing with, there are three capabilities on this maturity ladder that you want to climb up. Now, the first is having the required testing that you need. Do I have tools that cover at each stage of the journey what are various types of issues I have in my source code, open source, production level testing, etc.? And do I have a clear sense of the actions to take on the issues I find? The second part of that is having guardrails that you can automate within pipelines. And this is really where having universal security policies come in and a way to be able to enforce that policy across wherever source code is produced. The last part of it is, after you've achieved the first two, do you have a way of centrally gauging your software risk across wherever and whatever components make up your software? Now, what we often find with customers is the first one they actually have done pretty well. And as we explored in the first slide, if you've got 64% of organizations adopting at least 6 AST tools, they've grappled with some part of the first level. But the second two are often very difficult to do. You often maybe have policy being either applied manually or sometimes ad hoc. Sometimes with reporting software risk, a customer may be using a separate GRC tool or a manual custom BI dashboard that doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture of what all of these different data sources are. And the key here is for your application security program to really have teeth. It is important to have connectivity and a sense of all three of these different rungs of the ladder. And the derivative of that, and really what we talk about with good ASPM solutions, is that you introduce a sense of accountability and transparency to your application security program. And that's really the heart of why this trend has come up. So Gartner identified this trend called application security posture management, or ASPM, and it was really a derivative of of a confluence of a lot of trends that were happening in the application security industry, with risk management and specifically a keen eye on software risk management being a very primary concern of having that visibility across the board. Being able to ascertain from operations what exactly these workflows and orchestrating these workflows looks like from the day-to-day life of a developer, and merging that experience between the security team and the development team. And then, of course, the fundamental crux of it, which is being able to test and being able to do that testing in an efficient way and having that visibility across the board into all types of software defects and issues at every stage of the journey. And so really what we see as a fundamental part of being able to do ASPM well is, do you have connectivity to all three of these interlocking parts of what make up a application security program? And in fact, it's estimated that we'll continue to see this trend among a lot of organizations, because we see that there is this need to get that sense of what is really the true sense of what my security posture is regardless of where source code is produced. This is still a tremendous level of scale that organizations need to address. Jimmy, what have you seen from the day-to-day of a customer, and really take us to the stories you've heard on the ground of how difficult it really is to do this type of concept well, and the data problem it presents for your customers as well?
So the example I'll use is, I don't know that there's been a customer I've talked to in the last 2 years that didn't have some type of homegrown ASPM, right? Because they're trying to apply this across different testing tools. Application security personas have known this is a need for quite some time. We've seen the proliferation of new technology that provides insightful risk not be consolidated with other portions of traditional testing, like static analysis or composition analysis or pen testing. And we know from a security perspective, that's a mistake. It's a mistake to make decisions with lower quality data, with an impartial view of the data. And then specifically, as operations and development become closer together and less siloed, there isn't near as much difference, and there isn't these long hardening processes. We have to continually test operational security, application security, and we have to be able to visualize that, from an application perspective, because it doesn't really matter which tool found it or why you didn't fix it, or if because it was there or was here or was there. Like spreadsheets, technical debt, that's what I hear when I hear we don't have, a clear ASPM solution and we are building high quality enterprise grade software. I know that there's going to be a lot of manual effort in there. So that is what I'm expecting in those conversations, and that's typically the case.
And really, what ASPM at large requires to be able to be comprehensive and effective is something that comes back to several different principles that we really see across the board from what you described in grappling with that sense of the truth and overcoming that level of manual overhead and time that is added to the development process because security is a bottleneck. There are really these 4 principles that ASPM can really be a lever to help combat a lot of that pain point. The first is that you have to have an ASPM solution that can integrate with every tool that you use across your environment, not just when we talk about testing, but really it can integrate with all of what your developers interact with every day. A very key part of what makes ASPM successful is that security is meeting development where they are. And meshing that security experience with the developer experience and keeping pace with that, one of the fundamental parts of it is being able to integrate across a heterogeneous development environment. The second aspect of that is being able to prioritize issues in a standardized way to be able to really accelerate that process of triage. And really what this comes down to is that an ASPM solution is allowing you to define that criteria of what my prioritization looks like and what security work really matters most to my developer. The second is the third is being able to have a way of centralizing policies. And we're going to talk about in a minute why policy is so much of a centerpiece of a successful ASPM strategy in that introduction of standardization. The last point here is that it gives you a total view of risk posture. And really what we're getting at here is in the spirit of being able to make the most out of the data and tooling that you have. An ASPM solution consolidates visibility. And that is really a key part of how, when we talk about auditing your software, keeping compliant, this is really the value of how ASPM not only takes the most of what you have in your AppSec investment, but allows you to continuously improve on that AppSec investment. So with that, we'll jump into really what are the various data sources and what are the key underpinnings of why you need a ASPM solution to have this level of connectivity and integration with these various tools, and what is it required to make that soup work. So Jimmy, walk us through the ingredients of that, and what really is required to get that comprehensive view.
Absolutely. So in order to get the comprehensive view, we need to normalize data across these different areas, right? So we have development, build, test, deployment, and production, and various types of activities that typically happen in those various software development lifecycle activities. They likely come from different vendors. There is obviously a wide variety of capabilities and techniques and quality across these various tools and techniques. So the first thing that has to be done is the issues have to be normalized. We have to have a way to normalize the security issues and, at a minimum, the severity of these issues. And the reason that we want to normalize the severity of these issues and the taxonomy of these types of weaknesses is so that we can universally apply a policy, and so we can give customers the ability to understand what was tested, when was it fixed, when was it found, how are we doing against what does it matter how we're doing against, the full breadth of a rule pack of a static analysis tool? It's about what we're trying to do for this particular application. This is an internally facing application. We have different goals than if this is an externally facing application. So the ability to normalize the data, to do that accurately, to have the ability to calculate and normalize the severity so it can be efficiently communicated, and then a consistent approach, right, to be able to track all of this information. So the ability to see in the dashboards how you are doing against policy, how are you getting better or worse, right? Looking at those as North Star KPIs to how you get better, because those are the specific issues that you're targeting across all of these issues. Those are your organizational goals to improve. There are a number of different areas that these various tools can look at, but it's really about understanding what does the customer care about? What do we care about from a security perspective based on the risk profile of the application? We have to be able to normalize that, apply a consistent policy, and then we can start to tell you how you're getting better or worse because we know what it's being judged on, right? And it's not the capabilities of an SCA or a SaaS tool just taken out of context. It's your actual risk profiles that have then led to policies that can be applied to these projects and will work because of the normalization.
There's one question on here that really, Jimmy, if you could take us into how you see this manifesting with customers, is what makes up my software? What even to begin with is that process of discovery of what even makes up my software across the board? If you could give us a glimpse at why is this such a difficult problem for customers to grapple with when they really start to go down this path of ASPM and getting that comprehensive data set? Talk to us a little bit about what you've heard.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have static analysis tools that can find weaknesses in source code, right? But those are theoretical weaknesses and require auditing, right? We have then the ability to look for known vulnerabilities, which typically is run against your actual open source dependencies, right? Checking against a national vulnerability database, but we have methods for defining known vulnerabilities. We need to exercise and test our APIs, right? We want to dynamically exercise the application once it's deployed to discover vulnerabilities that may be easy to find dynamically, but very difficult to find through static or software composition analysis, right? Could be problems with regards to the way in which our software is packaged, the way it is containerized, the way it is deployed, the operational code that's related to the code. It could be being deployed into a cloud environment. Are the cloud security configurations being taken in context with the source code, with the open source libraries, right? With the penetration test of that application. So when we look at what makes up a software application and we have both the code, the libraries, the APIs, the containers, the configuration, you can start to see the number of tools that are required to find vulnerabilities in those methods and those phases. And that leads to the proliferation of tools and then leads to the necessity for normalization, policy, and consistent communication. With regards to discovery, We often look, in terms of source code. It's often a nice element of discovery for a lot of organizations as well.
So really what is required to make this all work is that your ASPM solution has to have a way of taking that data across whatever testing tooling that you have. And in an organization, as you showed in your previous slide, there are various sources of that across vendors and across both your automated tooling and your manual testing. There are various AST tools that you may be adopting, both across, by the way, on-prem tooling and cloud-based tooling as well. And you will have as well your manual testing that is also a required part of that data analysis. And at the same time, you have to have a way of being able to deduplicate redundant results across all of that data. Oftentimes, you could be, let's say, using an SCA tool that finds some similar results to a container scanning tool. And there has to be a way to be able to deduplicate a lot of redundant information across one source of truth. And a good ASPM solution can reconcile that also with some very helpful context on releases and various branches and stakeholders that are part of that feedback loop, in being able to centrally derive that source of, hey, I found this issue in the test branch, and I can go in and have that continuous kind of single view with my security team as well on collaborating on that information. So being able to integrate these key sources of information across what actually makes up my software, the structure of that, and reconciling that with testing results. A good ASPM solution gives you that total sense of the truth. And that is often, as you said, Jimmy, that is a very difficult thing to do if you're spread out and you maybe have some pieces of that across different tools, but you don't have a way of kind of normalizing that within one single view. And really, that level of data analysis is what is empowering you to be able to then prioritize the right results to escalate to developers directly. And ideally, your ASPM solution has a way of being able to directly sync this with the issue trackers that your developers are working within. And I think this is something, if you could elaborate a little bit actually on why is this so key to making security work within the developer experience, and how in the context of what your customers are dealing with, it's important to have an ASPM solution that, and what are the characteristics of it that really make life easier for the developer and eliminate the security bottleneck for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that you and I have talked about before. We kind of refer to it as the developer dream. But when I asked the question earlier, I said, what's the most effective way to communicate with a developer in your organization? And for the majority of enterprises, that's through a dedicated issue tracking platform, right? There's already a platform in which work is communicated to developers. And if we can introduce consistent processes that allow to take advantage of existing workflows, right? That lets us go faster. That's less technical debt, right? That's less mess, right? But the devil's in the details, right? You have to be able to well format the information. The information has to be well presented. It has to be presented for the context of the type of security discipline it's coming from, whether it be software composition analysis or static analysis, needing to have potentially an interactive analysis trace to look through the code, right? To look at the entry points and exit points. So the ability to bidirectionally synchronize with a third-party issue tracking platform that may be used to track releases, development work, allows the security team to know exactly what's going on, what's exactly being fixed as per policy, but allows the developers to consume the risk and triage that either in their IDE or their issue tracking platform, and then mark that as to do, doing, done, whatever the actual statuses are. And then we can track that in the ASPM solution. And typically the ASPM solution is not going to own, that type of workflow. And so it is typically better to integrate with a workflow tool that can handle the ticketing process, and we can fit into that. So the ability to kind of bidirectionally manage that in a third-party system allows the developers to be communicated with in the way they would like to, which is not being trained on another security platform. And kind of the only thing I'll put in there is I love the concept of a deep link in an issue tracking platform, because we do our best to make the tickets really well formatted, but sometimes you need a cool UI to go through a security issue, and there are some contextual situations for that. And so I think that's helpful as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a key word here, which is policy, in being able to operationalize that criteria and start to set some very key set of standards around how do you prioritize an issue and what classifies as that high severity, high priority issue in cutting down that level of developer work. So one of the concepts here that is important to understand is that in looking at the process of implementing controls with all of what you're doing with AppSec, there are some initiatives that you can leverage for effectiveness and coverage, and some that, while they're lofty goals, it's difficult to usurp that level of being able to operationalize at scale. And one of the graphic we show here is taken from a report from the Cybersecurity Collaborative on really the CISO's guide to implementing AppSec. And one of the concepts that is touched on here is that there are certain initiatives that, while it's a very desired approach to have that in an AppSec program, and ideally we actually are able to do all of what is plotted on this graph here, there's some through which you will not necessarily get this type of coverage you want, even though they're highly effective. And there are some initiatives where you can accomplish that level of coverage if you do it right, and you can achieve a certain level of automated and very scalable level of control. If we look at, for example, developer security training, making sure that your developers constantly uphold across the board a certain level of quality, secure code when they write code, or when you look at vulnerability management and having tools that would really comprehensively give you the whole picture across wherever your software is produced of what the vulnerability status is of where your most vulnerable software and its components are. Now, these two goals, while they're very desired, it's difficult to, for example, across everywhere your software is produced, not just from developers you have in-house that could maybe go through that level of security training, but if you're contracting with a third party, if you're contracting code through another outlet, if you are perhaps dealing with other sources that develop maybe some type of custom application within your org, and they have not necessarily gone through that level of same security training. Now, it can be difficult for you to get that level of coverage that you want, and being able to make sure that that level of quality is achieved with every developer that works on your code. There is maybe a difficulty with the vulnerability management platform you're using of being able to centrally ascertain across every source of your software that same level of visibility into where you're most vulnerable. And so one of the ways in which it's much more scalable to be able to instill that level of security criteria across pipelines and across wherever your code is produced is being able to have a way of implementing policies. And Jimmy, one of the things that I know we talk about a lot is with ASPM, one of the cornerstones here is the notion of having both pre and post scan policies and being able to auto trigger testing to be able to take the guesswork out of when I need to test, when is the right time to test. And then the second part, which is, well, when I have an issue, what is kind of my go-to criteria for whether that issue meets a certain level of priority. And I'd like to, have you talk to us a little bit about how you go about implementing policies that are effective and what an ASPM solution needs you to be able to account for when you start going about framing your policy framework.
Absolutely. So from a pre-scan perspective, I think it is absolutely necessary to have the ability to dynamically calculate risk, right? To then be able to make modifications to automated orchestration. In the future, I think we will have to operate very quickly and intelligently to automatically take action where we see specific risk. I think risk will change more frequently in the future. And if we think of risk as a dynamic calculation, the idea being that the commit that we might be examining could be a very large commit with a lot of fundamental changes to the code that we need to thoroughly examine because they've modified the authentication layer, they've modified other key portions of the software. That could be an incredibly risky commit that we want to then be able to dynamically exercise with our most accurate static analysis, our most accurate SCA. We might want to automate, a web crawl of certain vulnerabilities to ensure certain, vulnerabilities or dynamic vulnerabilities are not there. We want to be able to change that automatically, and there's no way to do that at the scale at which we build software. So for risk, that is going to change. And for your most important applications where we might want to do additional orchestration or potentially where we might want to do less orchestration for efficiency or to save compute, right? Pre-scan policy is meant for that use case. It's meant to run to be calculated dynamically, to run in pipelines, and to make real-time changes based on the policy of the types of orchestration that are necessary based on the dynamically calculated risk. So as the risk changes and the more it changes, the more valuable your pre-scan policy is to go do something about that in an automated fashion, right, with orchestration. Now, if we go into post-scan policy, this is really about what issues do you care about and when do you want them fixed, right? It is at the high level, that very basic. It is about the issues that you have to fix due to compliance standards, regulatory standards. Those are likely not to change as dynamically, right? It's likely that if you have to be PCI compliant, you will need to be PCI compliant tomorrow. And therefore, it is easier to apply a policy where you have normalized, deduplicated, and correlated all the results together. Now we can make any dimension of that normalized correlated data available to identify the issues that you care about and to then apply SLAs of when you want those specific issues to be fixed so that we can start to actually worry about, how is our software getting more secure? Not how are we doing against tool A or tool B or how are we actually getting better? How is the software becoming more secure? I have defined the policy as per the risk profile that's appropriate for this application, and how we've done is it's really like more of a true assessment in my opinion. So you're looking at kind of the concept here of the developers never look at issues that we don't care about, right? If they have extra time, which they likely don't, but if they did, they could go look at some issues, but they know exactly what issues is expected of the security team. I know the engineers on my team, they don't wonder if we have to fix the issue or not before the release. We know exactly what our policy is, and we know the criticality that's been of the issue, and we have to address it, and we know there's not much wiggle room there. So we just do it, and we're used to that, and I feel like that's an approach that really works and is very practical.
And really taking it back to Jimmy, something you talked about earlier with what you hear as the major pain point from customers of achieving AppSec ROI is that this all goes a long way into taking the guesswork out of AppSec at large. It takes the guesswork out of what decisions I need to make on what issues should I work on first. What are exactly the conditions that I need to test? Do I even need to test this particular software, or do I need to test when I've committed that code change? and also taking the guesswork out of where do I find the context of what exactly I need to go in and fix, and what exactly at large is my most vulnerable software. And these are all points that really this entire part of this ties together in giving you an overall picture of software risk. And I think that the derivative of so much you talk about with all of these components of the technical aspects of why an ASPM solution has to have these components to really have teeth is that it gives you this holistic picture of software risk when you are looking at auditing line by line, down to the line of code. What was the tool, the source, the exact issue that was found, and where it violates maybe certain compliance standards that you are looking at when you are going about the process of ascertaining the vulnerability of your software and whether you are compliant with standards that you have. And this is so central to making this all kind of come together. But there's another aspect I know you like to talk a lot about with risk attestation, and what exactly are maybe some aspects of an ASPM solution that are perhaps nice to have to help speed up that process. Can you bring us in a little bit into what you feel here is part of what can make this innovative, and what makes this more efficient and workable?
Absolutely. So with regards to, if we look at application security testing tools and the tools that are required to find the majority of the application security vulnerabilities that we're discussing, the two technologies that are the most well-known, that are the most automatable, are SAST and SCA, being that static analysis has many advantages. I won't go over them because I'm sure everyone here realizes them, but you can test early, you can test, it is a complete white box test, right? It's not a black box test. You know about everything, you can exercise everything theoretically. Known vulnerability detection, or SCA, is also a critical portion. I haven't talked to an application security team in the last 10 plus years that's not doing SAST and SCA for every single application that they have in their inventory. And therefore, since it is such an expected part of every application security testing program, having inbuilt options that are available from the ASPM solution gives a lot of advantages in terms of ease of use, complexity, overall total cost of ownership. But really, it's the expectations that I know these technologies are there, and therefore they can be built into workflows. They can be expected to be there. Gartner calls out, complexity as one of the difficulties to scaling SPM, but I can promise you it's not the volume of findings. That's a very addressable with known solutions to the problem, but knowing that you have a particular static analysis tool that can be used buildlessly, or with builds, or to do initial discovery of repositories, or SCA tools that could be leveraged against a new repository or a new acquisition, right, from a new software property that we've acquired. Having those inbuilt testing options makes things significantly less complicated. And if we know those tools are going to be necessary to find the vulnerabilities, it gives a lot of advantages to the ASPM that can provide inbuilt testing options.
Especially when we hear throughout the industry the trend towards vendor consolidation and simplifying the number of different vendors or different tools that you may be using. I think what you say is such an important part of really consolidating on what exactly in a contained solution in ASPM addresses every part of what an application security program, in order to have teeth to be effective, needs to be able to do. Testing is such a big part of that, in addition to the visibility and the risk management aspect. So to quickly wrap up, I want to give us some time to also answer everybody's questions. What in the long term is the importance of an ASPM approach, and really at large, why the industry is taking to this as a way to really tackle sustainable AppSec is really, there are three parts of the benefits from the perspective of making your application security program work for you. That At large, you have a way of improving product quality. You ensure that level of security checks. You ensure that level of being able to get that visibility across. You reduce that security friction in taking out the aspects of what traditionally has made your AppSec cause a lot of slowdown of that developer productivity. And lastly, and probably most importantly, that you're making the most of what you have. And you're maximizing the potential of harnessing that data, your staff, and that level of resourcing. So with that, I'd really like to hand it over to David for a lot of your questions, and hopefully we can address some other aspects of ASPM here. David?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great presentation, Natasha and Jimmy. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. If you're out there in the audience and you have a question, now's the time to get it in, because we're kicking off our Q&A and we've got some great questions already. I would love to have a few more. If there's something on your mind, don't forget about our best question prize as well, of course. But I'm just going to go ahead and start off. Alan's submitted some excellent questions here. First one I want to ask is, have you been able to find a way to calculate between risk and associated with a dollar amount? Do you have any recommendations on that? I'm envisioning Alan trying to justify, his ASPM solution.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, there's at places in which I, worked as an application security persona or customers that I talk to, I think assigning, a return on investment for application security is really key. I think part of the return on investment is kind of to what we spoke about earlier, is just the policy aspect, because then you ensure that you are actually showing an accurate return on investment. These are the things that we track. These are the things we care. These are the things that we fixed, and showing those issues that you fixed over time as per is, required. So I think the finding defect over time by criticality is, kind of an old school one, but I haven't heard someone tell me a significantly better one than that. And then you can always kind of use various, breach costs and things of that nature as well. That can be potentially helpful. But that'd be my thoughts. I don't know, Natasha, if you had anything to add there.
I would add to Alan's question that developer hours spent on defects. Jimmy, so much of what you talked about with policy is getting at that point of view of developer hours spent just in triage. It can often take, per finding, developers spent an inordinate amount of time just to ascertain whether to escalate that finding and fix it. A lot of times, if your developer is not even security trained, maybe even figuring out what is the best fix. And having an ASPM solution that directly, as you said, contextually gives you that guidance. This is the remediation guidance we give, and this is the source of that issue. And it works within the developer systems that they look at every single day. If you look at cost of a defect in correlation with the level, with the number of developer hours spent per week on cutting through that security work, you're going to find a lot in there about where an ASPM solution really saves you time and cost.
Yeah, and what Natasha was saying, I mean, if we look at what we didn't fix, what we decided to not look at, that we didn't spend 10 minutes or an hour on, or X, Y, Z at $225 an hour, right? That type of calculation, I think, it's a really good answer, Natasha.
Well said. Thank you. And let's see, another good question here from Alan. He's wanting to know, what are kind of the most common issues or symptoms in an organization that makes them, raise their hand and say, hey, I need an ASPM, and specifically, I need a solution from Synopsys?
I think anytime there is any kind of exploit or software breach of some kind, specifically if it's because the data was not consolidated or not available to the right personas, that is, one that I've definitely seen. I think developers revolting is also kind of not an uncommon kind of like, there's a developer revolt. We would like to talk to you about the developer dream and introducing a more easier or consistent or a more streamlined process. But really the efficiency of that, I think, is what I would put for that one.
Got it. And then who in the organization is typically responsible for implementing and managing an ASPM?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a convergence. It is typically, some is majority owned by application security, but we've seen a convergence of operational security teams and application security or security misconfigurations or kind of the operation or kind of Terraform and the configuration as code world that's kind of evolved as we've seen the shift to various clouds. So really it's changing. I always used to talk to the static team and the dynamic team, and they were always different. The people who ran the pen tests were always a completely different team than anyone who had anything to do with static analysis or SCA or anything in terms of network security or operational security. And we are just seeing a very real convergence of both those personas, those teams. If they're not the same person, then they're working jointly together, they're sharing risk, and they're trying to accomplish the goal together. So we really are seeing that very much. And you can see it in the types of tools that our customers ask for, the types of additions we've made.
I'd also quickly add to what you said, Jimmy. When the industry looks at vulnerability management at large, I think that there's a growing consensus among enterprises that application security, if you're not doing it comprehensively, you've missed a major part of that vulnerability management problem. And it's really brought the developer security champion into that conversation. And so I would add to what Jimmy said that we find that also the one security champion on a developer team that's really the advocate for helping the development team adopt that level of security protocol is another user that is very important in getting buy-in on an ASPM solution and vetting that, because they often are the ones responsible for vetting whether, hey, does it actually comply with integrating well with our environment? Is it actually kind of living up to a lot of the principles we outline in our presentation today? So I would just add that the developer security champion is also an important stakeholder here.
Great point. And I'm afraid we're starting to run out of time here in our Q&A. We still got a lot of great questions we'll have to get back to after the event, but I want to make sure I ask this question before we go to you, Natasha, and that is, what do you recommend if folks want to learn more about Software Risk Manager?
So Software Risk Manager, our brand new ASPM solution that we have announced from Synopsys as of yesterday, is available for you to learn more about at synopsys.com /software risk manager. And we encourage you, go on there, check out all of the resources we have for you. We have data sheets and some and additional pieces that will help you as you kind of chart out your ASPM journey. So, and keep checking back for more. We're going to have a lot more to come on Software Risk Manager.
Excellent. Well, it's a hot topic. I know a lot of the folks in the audience, based on the tons of questions, are excited to learn more. So congratulations on the new release. And Natasha and Jimmy, it's been really great having you on the webinar today. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to everyone out there in our audience for joining us on the webinar today. Don't forget about the handouts tab. That link right there on the top, Get Started with Synopsys, will take you to a landing page with 5 different resources, including the full slide deck from today, a blog post, a data sheet on Software Risk Manager, the new product from Synopsys. So make sure that you check that link out. And with that, it's my pleasure now to announce the winner of our Amazon $250 gift card prize. This is going to Vanessa Godfrey from Idaho. Congratulations. And we'll also reach out to our best question prize winner as well. Thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.